This year is the worst drought, the worst year since 1977.
Because we had the driest January, the driest February, and driest March in California history. We talk so often, people say, well, we just need to build 100 new dams. We also need something to fill the dams up with.
Reservoirs released water, a lot of it washed out to sea.
The ABC 10 weather team investigates. Is California wasting water?
I'm going to probably not be very popular, but I'm going to tell you a lot of the drought we're in right now is man-made. There are a number of environmental court rulings that operate the system, not how it was intended.
I'm happy to be back. I was stricken with COVID last year and became my own water source. So I couldn't be here, and I missed it. You know, the thing is, we're in a room of huge brains. And even if you don't understand what's being talked about, you can tell by their body language that they're sincere about what they're talking about. And so you'll learn something here if you're a first-timer. Every time I come here, I wish that this presentation could be made available to the general public, or maybe broken up into segments because of the short American attention span, and delivered to the general public. But I just think there's so much to learn, because as we learn from these droughts and these extreme swings in weather, from El Nino wet patterns to dry patterns, that water is going to become a really, even more than it is now, a state issue, a global political issue. And I think the more the general public could learn about it, the better off they would be. So I think you provide a great service, and it's an honor for me to be a part of it this year. I want to thank Steve and Jeff for inviting me to participate again. How many of you are attending the summit for the first time? Anybody? Oh, fantastic. We welcome you. We hope you'll walk away with a better understanding of Orange County's water supply. Before we dive into today's program, I'd like to give you the lay of the land. Our speakers are all incredibly accomplished. However, we will try and keep introductions short so that we have more time to hear from them, so their bios are included in our digital program. To keep us moving, speakers will hear this sound. When you hear that sound, jump under the table and don't ask any questions. Now, you'll have 2 minutes remaining in your presentation. When you hear this sound, you're done. Each session includes time for audience question and answers. So what do you say? You ready to get started? Let's do it. Watch this video. All right, well, today's first session is entitled Drought, or Missed Opportunities. During this session, we're going to hear about the historic 1957 California Water Plan and whether the current plan charts a way forward to a reliable water supply. We're joined today by Lisa Ohlund, principal at Ohlund Management and Technical Resources. Lisa will serve as our session moderator. Joining Lisa are panelists Darcy Burke, director of Elsinore Valley Municipal Water District. And as I mentioned your name, I suppose they can come up on the stage, correct? Come on up, Lisa. Also, come on up, Darcy. Also, Bill Jones, who's a former California Secretary of State that we all remember, and an assemblyman, and Jason Phillips, Chief Executive Officer of Friant Water Authority. Welcome to all. Good to see you. Go ahead, Lisa.
So, Fritz, I have to tell you that when I lived in San Diego growing up, we were always kind of in awe of LA sportscasters, sportscasters, weathercasters. We had Regis Philbin, we had Ted Leitner, we had the unknown eater, who was great. But it was an open secret that when we really wanted to know what the weather was going to be, we turned on the LA stations. And my family was a GM family. They were an NBC family, when you pick those things. So you were our weathercasters. I fangirl out whenever you're here. So good morning. Winston Churchill said, "The farther backward you look, the farther forward you can see." This morning, we're first going to take a trip back almost 70 years ago to the 1950s, and a time when severe flooding killed scores of people in California and caused damage the equivalent of $5 billion today. That's the equivalent of the damages that were done during the Great San Francisco earthquake. Then we're going to move to the 90s and the 2000s, when we started to better understand that some disasters were slower moving, but no less costly. And then we'll jump to today and talk about how far forward can we see, and whether we missed some opportunities that may have helped us avoid the water shortages that are being predicted. Fair warning, some of this conversation may make some of us in this room uncomfortable. Some of it is going to seem like denial. Some of it is going to seem like the world has moved on and there's a reluctance to embrace change. Some of it is going to be rueful. I told you so. Look where we're at. I think you all know what I'm talking about. How could the San Diego Padres spend $300 million on arguably the best talent in the Major League Baseball and have literally nothing to show for it? We finished behind Arizona. I bet you guys thought I was going to talk about water wars. Nah, we can throw a lot of money at those and actually have something to show for it. Or can we? I will tell you that there's a lot of parallels between my beloved pods and our water issues. They both have been underperforming, have been plagued by some key losses, a lack of leadership, and face exceptional competition. Success in baseball or water is not guaranteed because of spending alone. The situation is complex and unpredictable, and there's a bit of luck involved too. Just look at last year's rainfall and how low the reservoirs were before the rain started in December. But before I start throwing out insanely difficult fastball questions at our distinguished panel, I'd like to point out something that I hope you'll find interesting. If you grew up in California in the 4th grade, you had to produce something so difficult, so terrifying in its enormity, that there would be no future academic requirement that would bother you because you survived this. I am, of course, speaking of the California State Report. Unless you were going to an Ivy League elementary school, the California State Report was the first time you learned about minimum page numbers, where you love title pages and table of contents because they counted toward that requirement. It's where you learned about the encyclopedia, about writing a draft, producing a bibliography, citing your sources. Everything you needed to get through Comp 101 in college, you learned in that 4th grade report.
That's true.
Now, I wish I could tell you, as you wonder where in the world she's going with this, that I wrote such an amazing report that is enshrined in a bit of glass case in Mission Elementary School in Oceanside. And no, I barely got a B on it. And when I got it back, it had so many red marks on it that it looked like a grammar crime scene. But I digress. The thing is, that report made a huge impression on me. I learned a lot about California. And for a Marine Corps brat, it gave me a sense of belonging that is rare. We move so much that you learn to never really get attached to a place, because in 13 months, you'd be on to the next duty station and new friends. But that California report gave me so much knowledge about a place that became home, not just a duty station. Luckily, my dad scored several postings in California, San Francisco, Oakland, Camp Pendleton, 29 Palms, El Toro, that I was able to see the breadth and beauty of the state. And I learned something that most of you probably don't know. No, it's not that San Jose was the first capital, not Monterey. It's why California is California, literally. Why the state is shaped the way it is. Why is the northern boundary where it is? Why are the southern and eastern boundaries where they are? It's because of water. The northern boundary of California is an outgrowth of the boundary of New Spain, which followed the Colorado and Arkansas rivers up from the Texas area up to their sources until they met the 42nd parallel, and then followed that to the ocean, which conveniently gave New Spain the right to most of the water from the Klamath River, the second largest river in what would ultimately become California. For the eastern and southern boundaries, those were decided at the California Constitution in Monterey. There were two factions there, one that wanted to include what is today's Nevada, Arizona, Utah territory, which also included parts of Wyoming and Colorado into California, and the other one which wanted to exclude those, but keep the eastern Sierra Rivers, lower Colorado River Valley, and the Imperial Valley. And I'm going to leave it up to you to decide if the loss of the Nevada, Utah, Arizona, Wyoming, and Colorado was a missed opportunity, but I think the Met Board would think it is. So I made up that part about doing that for the California State Report. I mean, do you think if I had done that research in 4th grade, I would have gotten a B on that report? But the part about the boundaries is true. ChatGPT is not the only one that can spin a story. Okay, so let's get going with our panel. Well, you know what, I'm gonna stay up here.
I'm going to move for you when you're here, once you be here.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, thank you, Secretary Jones. My life gets better and better. Okay, Darcy.
Uh-oh.
You're such a shrinking flower.
I am.
Can you provide some background information on the 1957 California Water Plan?
So let's start on page 1. It's 300 and some pages. Actually, no, I always believe that telling a story through pictures is so much better. So I had a team, and some of you know my team. My daughter Marissa helped me put together a short little video that'll kind of give you an overview of the 1957 Water Plan, some missed opportunities, and then it has a very big question at the end for you. So if you'd roll the video, please, thank you.
This is a fast trip, but if it had no other benefit than to permit us to look at this valley and others like it across the country, where we can see the greenest and most richest earth producing the greatest and richest crops in the country, and then a mile away, see the same earth and see it brown and dusty and useless, and all because there's water in one place and there isn't in another. I know of no better trip for any president or any member of the House or Senate or indeed any citizen, particularly those of us who live in the East, where water is everywhere and is a burden, to realize how very precious it is here in the Western United States.
So tell us what you really think.
It's
So-
a missed opportunity.
Well, yeah, I mean, less than 25% of the plan was built.
Correct.
So tell us about those missed opportunities.
So I really think it's the tipping point. I don't know if any of you have read the book, The Tipping Point, but it's what caused the public to stop trusting us with their money, trusting us that we would have reliability. And I really think, although there were a lot of contributing factors, it was that proposition. It was north versus south. Don't build that peripheral canal, right? And that caused water agencies to pull back and say, okay, we're going to be the silent service. We're going to keep our mouth shut. We're going to try and keep our rates low, and we're going to be quiet. And so we stopped building the infrastructure we need for a thriving and vibrant state. And we started talking about north versus south. You know, I've been very fortunate to have some really great mentors in my life. Some of them are in this room. And to really understand it, if I don't understand the history, I can't understand my future. And public trust is everything. And we lost that in that election. And we never went back and got it. And we never worked to build it. And I think that's what the missed opportunity is. That's why we don't have sites, and we don't have temperance, and we haven't done any repair and replacement on the State Water Project, and all those other things. Instead, we keep taking away instead of building up. And people expect it. We have put the burden on our communities to do more with less, and in some case now do more with nothing. I don't know about you, but I love food. And I like to eat a lot, really good stuff, and we grow really good stuff in California, and I don't know how you do that without water, so doing more with nothing doesn't work. But we did that to ourselves. We lost that opportunity when that proposition failed.
But, you know, something good had to come out of the last 40 years. I mean, we still turn our taps and water comes out, right? We're still eating. To some extent, didn't some of that have to happen?
I don't think it had to happen that way. I think one of the best things that has happened, though, is we have found collaboration. I'm going to give Metropolitan some credit here. About 17, 18 years ago, when Jack Foley was chairman, I think, right about that time, Metropolitan had a committee, and it was the Business and Ag Committee. And it was a subcommittee, and it didn't meet all the time, and Larry Dick was co-chair. And they started doing inspection trips in the Central Valley, and they started building relationships and understanding that it was not ag versus urban, it was ag and urban. And I think those relationships are really still very important. And as Metropolitan expands their collaboration to work with other groups, I hope they don't leave those ag groups behind, because it has to be an ag and urban solution.
So, with the Colorado River Operating Plan undergoing major revisions, you've got renewal of the State Water Project contract coming up.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think all of that's going to affect the next 10 years?
I hope, which is not necessarily what I think, but let me put what I hope first. I hope it puts some pressure on the state that we expect reliability, and that's what we paid for. Don't operate our system based on rulings by species, by whim. Operate it in the way it was intended. You know, if we decide not to renew that contract, that's a lot of revenue that the state no longer has. And we need some courage and some backbone to kind of come to the table knowing that we actually have the cards. So that's what I hope. What I think will happen will be more of the same. And that's up to us.
Well, I'm not going to play poker with you, that's for sure.
I don't play poker well.
Secretary Jones, thank you for everything you did for us. The Secretary was part of the 3 strikes law approval at the state, and that's something that affected us, my family personally, so I just want to thank you for that. So take us back to those Cal-Fed days. Take us back to the time when, you know, there was so much cooperation and so much hope that we were going to fix the Bay Delta. So how did that agreement come about?
Well, you have to have two parties, the federal government and the state government, come together with leaders that want to solve the problem. Before you even get to the point of agreeing on what it is, you have to have that to begin with. And in that particular case, the Clinton administration and the Wilson administration in the state came together and with a concept of having everybody get well together. That was the original thought. That's the urban, ag, the environment, and the elements that were originally put together the state water plan. I was looking at President Kennedy I remember standing in the backyard at our farm when he flew over to dedicate that. My dad was there, and he was involved with putting together the oversight under Governor Reagan to look at the projects. I remember hearing about they're going to take water over the Tehachapi's to LA, and everybody thought that's not possible. You can't do that. There's no way that's going to work. And to the extent that that type of cooperation and that kind of vision is important, but the fundamentals that make the system work or not work, or make solutions work or not, is what is the motivation of the parties that come together. And our daughter, who's here, grew up in the water world, served on water boards in the valley, and Adon worked with me when I was secretary on this very project, the CalFed. And I think you asked about missed opportunities. We went forward under Governor Wilson's administration and raised $250 million in Prop 204. We went to Washington and got another $250 million in matching. And the concept was state puts up a quarter, feds put up a quarter. I remember going in and talking with the Speaker Gingrich and the local congressman to convince them that we would move forward with this. And the missed opportunity there was, I think that not all the parties that came into that and really were interested in the conclusion. Again, the motivation of the parties is important. And you'd say, well, the environmentalists, they want to protect the environment. Farmers want to farm. Cities want drinking water. But it's not that simple. Because in the case of some, they don't want any growth. And what you find is it's easier to stop something from happening than to make it happen, as most of us know. And so when we went back and got that money, and I noticed one of the items that's mentioned is, well, there's not enough funding to finish CalFed, even with the concept that we all get well together. Well, we went forward in that initial funding process with the understanding that if we did that everyone would get together and help fund the projects that were necessary, additional storage. We pulled Sykes off the shelf in '92 that had been put on the shelf back in my dad's day and dusted it off, and that's what we were going to use as one of the facilities for the CalFed. When we came back to do it, all of a sudden, there was no interest in doing it. So going to your point about confidence, relationships, if you're going to make a commitment that you're all going to get well together to start with, and you're going to go out and invest in the first phase of that, then the parties have to stay together and agree if they got theirs first, it's your turn. We should get something for distribution, storage, and other solutions. The other thing I think that's critical is quality standards. I was involved in drafting and passing the Safe Drinking Water Act in California in the mid-'80s before the feds even did one. We spent a lot of time on that, and there was a lot of people that, much more liberal than I was, that worked on that, and we worked together to put that together for California. Unfortunately, standards become a limiting factor for water. And if you keep driving the standards down, either and you use the excuse of the environment, or you end in a situation where you can never satisfy the lowest standard. Because back when I started this discussion on drinking water, it was parts per billion. Now it's parts per trillion because you can find them. Well, you can't chase that, rabbit down the hole to a point where you give up all your water either for the environment or for drinking water standards, which do not accomplish that much improvement in the overall safety and protection of the people. And I think it's not an either or, it's a willingness to commit, and as you said, keep your word in the process. And I think back in those days we had some support for that, some relationships which helped. I think going forward, the missed opportunities in the future, I hope, I think my father's generation did a much better job than than we did in being able to close that deal. And I think one of the reasons why when he passed away and we named the Tracy pumps after him is because I remember coming back in high school and when he was working for Governor Reagan and he'd be off looking at one of the projects, my mother used to say, he spent more time looking at that pumping plant when she was driving back from Sacramento. She got so tired of going to Tracy to look at that pumping plant. And so, again, there was that institutional knowledge, but there was the cooperation on the part of the people. And as you mentioned earlier, when Met came up to the valley and got interested in talking to the farmers, I remember that whole process. That was very helpful. And it was not either or. The other thing I want to say is that there's a priority of uses of water which helped form the original program. It was environment, urban, ag was last. And the priority was such that everybody knew in dry years ag was going to get taken first. And the concept of how much should go to the environment, and we probably didn't put enough to the environment in the early projects time, there's no question that was the case. But over time, the balance that's necessary to make this work, and balance is really the key word. If you don't keep that balance among the parties, if one party just gets ahead of the other, or if the motivation of the party is not in line with what the goal of the organization is, and they have a veto, as you mentioned with the courts, which is they've turned in a situation where they're running the water process. If anybody can run to the court and stop a project, then you lose confidence in the process. And it's maybe nothing you did, it's just what happens, and you end up not being able to deliver for the people what they expect. So I was looking to the governor, Newsom, talking about storage. I mean, he's talking about a facility my dad dealt with in -- I dealt with in '92, and he's been governor for 8 years, and he's still talking about it. I mean, the fact is that has to stop. Not that storage is the old solution, and I don't think that's true. And there's been a lot of groundwater storage and other improvements in conservation, which is very important. However, just because you have a finite situation and you have repeated droughts, you have to be able to catch this water, and whether it's above ground, below ground, you have to be able to store it, and you have to be able to fund the projects to do it, and you do it in a timely manner to keep the confidence that people expect. Otherwise, they lose confidence in the government and getting it done. So hopefully, this generation and the new projects, I was just laughing because the Western Livestock Journal I have gotten for 50 years, the headline was Cal Delta program just came out, the new one, in the headline. And I showed my daughter when I got in the car today at the airport. I said, I got one of these from '92. The headline is this. And I said to one of my staff that sent me he dug through his information when he was moving, and he sent me a testimony I gave to the State Water Board during the drought of '92. And it's the exact same testimony, if I change the date, I could use today in the last drought. Those problems are based in two things. Our inability to add additional storage in one place or the other, and secondly, water quality standards being used to drive a zero tolerance. And if you're going to chase water quality with quantity, or you're going to chase environmental standards with quantity, you could use all the water in the state and never reach that conclusion. And that doesn't mean we're not supportive of conservation. It just means you have to be very cautious about when you set those kind of standards, how you're going to actually achieve them.
Well, let's drill down into CalFed a little bit, because you made some great points about what you need to do. The Little Hoover Commission looked at it. The State Legislative Analyst's Office looked at it. They actually came up with different reasons they thought it wasn't moving forward. This is 2005, 2006. What do you think of their findings? Lack of leadership, no dedicated funding. There had been some early successes there, but it was definitely stalled at this point. Did you agree with those two reports?
I had left public life by the time that report came out. Then State Senator Costa left and went to Congress, Governor Schwarzenegger asked me to come back and serve on the CalFed board for there at the end. And so when I came back and looked at it, and I'd been away from it for a while, I think those were fair statements. However, I also think that what I said initially on the funding, we would have gotten further in that process if everybody would have stayed for the second phase of the effort, because we got off to, a pretty good start.
Right.
What you said about the leadership, when you change administrations, that's always a problem. And what you said about the lack of focus is true. State Senator Pat Johnson from the Delta, that was a very difficult situation to try and get the Delta folks on board with whatever we were doing. Very tenuous, and it still is, of course. But he and I served together for 10 years, so I went back on that panel, and we were working on it. But I think the fact of the matter is, again, I go back to what's the motivation of the parties. You can blame the framework, you can blame the process, but if the parties that are looking to solve the problem are not coming with the right motivation, then you're trying to solve a problem that you can never solve. And if they can always go to the court, then you'll never be able to resolve this issue. And we all end up chasing a solution that's impossible to achieve.
Yeah, there's a lot of parts with that were moving at the same time. We had a lot of changes, and particularly how strong the Delta group was starting to get at that point. But there were a lot of successes with CalFed. I mean, as you say, those early efforts took all $500 million and put it out there and started getting some really good science, right? What are some of the other successes that you think are living on today with that?
Well, the basic problems haven't changed, unfortunately, and the basic solutions are still there. They haven't changed. The problem is, to be able to orchestrate the solution, you have to have good will on the part of everyone. So I remember the Little Hoover Commission report. I read it after I'd been gone, and I love Little Hoover. They do a great job. But when you get done reading the report, it hasn't solved the problem. It's defined the problem, hasn't solved the problem. Right. And only willing people can solve the problem. And I think, again, what's the motivation of the players? So I would just say, to answer your question, what the biggest problem with CalFed, when we came back together after putting together the $500,000, which was almost all for environmental purposes. And we all agreed, Farm Bureau, all of us, cities, we do that first. When we came back to do the rest of it, the wheels came off. All right, there was the biggest problem. Now, you can define it better, you can have better leadership, you can have better focus, but you've got to have willing partners in that process. And when administrations change, the intention changes. And Governor Wilson and I think Secretary Babbitt and then President Clinton, they had a real interest in getting that done. Senator Feinstein was very involved in that, as was I. And when you lose those players, you're bound to lose some focus. But funding is important, and it's going to continue to be a big problem. So there was successes, yes, but you want to put your finger on the problem. I think the problem with that, and I think you're going to have that problem no matter whether it's the new program or the old program. You have to define the players, you have to define the motivations, and you have to get everybody to the point where they're willing to accept the results from each of the players' solutions so that everybody gets well together, which was the fundamental basis of CalFed.
Great. So, Jason, what's happened to ag since 1982 after the peripheral canal? What's happened during the last 40 years?
So I'm going to have to stand up to grab my clicker.
Oh, so here, no, let me get it.
And stretch out a bit.
And I can get my phone, too.
Perfect. So before I answer that question, I started working for the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation in 2001. Lester Snow was the regional director. And the CalFed Record of Decision had just been signed, and they enticed me to come over because we were going to build Temperance Flat Reservoir. And when they needed a project manager, I was working at the Army Corps of Engineers, and I said, hey, that'd be great. I want to be part of building a dam. Yeah. So I think 22, 23 years later, they're still in the feasibility study phase on that.
Moving right along.
But look, my opinion, in that short time period, because I've done a lot of different assignments with CalFed and Temperance Flat and San Joaquin River Restoration Program, and I managed the Klamath Basin Project, and I was deputy RD at the Sacramento office of the Bureau of Reclamation, and I've been almost 8 years now at Friant. And so I've been in a lot of frying pans, but my opinion...
Friant pans.
Friant pans, yeah. Just my opinion is that too much of California water is managed based on feelings. Okay?
Feeling.
Yes, and there's a time and a place for feelings to sort of manage.
So glad.
But I'll just tell you that if you all want to hear about how feelings, if you want feelings, you're not going to get it. I'm an engineer, planner, project manager, and so, and frankly, there is a good time and a place to have feelings interject on California water policy, but probably not so much from the water districts. Somebody needs to lay out facts. And so when I answer this question here about what's happened since 1982, I'm gonna just share facts. And you know, there's a lot of it that you already know, but I do think, and a lot of you are probably, okay, well, what are the solutions? Because I'm about to lay out the problems, because I like to start out very depressing. But look, when we get into solutions, just understand it's an unfair question. If you ask me to come up and identify solutions for Congress to balance the federal deficit, right? It's like, come on. I mean, I have my ideas, but this is bigger than even that. And so I want to start with what's happened. Maybe some of this you already know. And by the way, PPIC and their Water Policy Center has just been a godsend for those of us like me that want data about the problem and not just feelings. So Ellen has been great, and Friant's been a supporter. But look, one of the things maybe you didn't all know was that if you look at the San Joaquin Valley, where most of the agriculture in the state takes place, well over half of the acreage farmed is in the San Joaquin Valley, 5.5 million acres. Most of the top counties of ag production happens in the San Joaquin Valley. Our net water use has been flat. This is a PPIC chart since the 1980s, okay? Now, we've shifted a lot from annual crops to permanent crops because of market conditions and costs, and
People want almond milk.
and we've been shamed over the years over, you know, how bad cotton is and alfalfa, so we moved it to nuts, and now we get shamed for that, but it's harder to change now in permanent. But what this chart shows right here is that the orange is what we import, the green is what we have available to us for local supplies, and the dashed line is our demand. That's what we've actually used. Well, Jason, how can that be? The dashed line is above the supply line. Oh, yeah. In fact, if you look at 2014 and 2015, it's above by about 8 million acre feet. That's groundwater overdraft, folks. That's how we've survived 40 years talking feelings about how we're going to solve California water problems. And all the while, everybody's been taking advantage of the fact that in the San Joaquin Valley, like that's where the water shortage has been squeezed. And the water problem there has grown as we've been regulated. So that's just the reality, is that we haven't been using more water. We've been more efficient. We've been more productive as we go to higher value crops, as we go to drip systems over flooding, which, by the way, if by going to drip systems, we've significantly reduced our groundwater recharge. That's probably one of the single most negative effects to drip. And in the valley, we're a closed system. Most of the urbans in California are used to, hey, we can recycle our way out of this, we can conserve our way out of this. All we do when we recycle and conserve is we end up making this overdraft problem worse. And so it's not that, again, this is not feelings-based, this is just the reality. People want to feel that conservation and recycling are good, and in some areas it really is. The other thing that's happened since 1982 is a continuing trend that hasn't changed for over 100 years of groundwater overdraft. It's been sustaining for a long time. Speaking of the California Water Plan, when the water plan, both the CVP and the State Water Project were being designed with facts and engineers and, it was known that there was an over 6 million acre feet per year average overdraft happening in the valley, and that public policy makers needed to make a decision. Should we reduce the number of farmland so that we don't have that overdraft, or do we build projects so that we can keep growing food? That's a public policy decision. It can be based on feelings. I'm fine with that. But if you decide to keep it, then now it's based on engineering and infrastructure and, yes, meeting standards. Well, so 6 million acre feet a year when we built the CVP and the State Water Project. There's a report in the 1970s from the Bureau of Reclamation that said, we think the Peripheral Canal and Auburn Dam are dead. The problem is that was how we were going to finish off resolving the overdraft problem in the valley. And we project that by 2020, we'll be at 2 million acre feet per year of overdraft in the valley. And so there'll have to be another solution. Well, guess what? No other solution. And so as we've been through all these decades of moving forward and having public policy discussions about how to solve the Delta, the continued overdraft is occurring, the continued subsidence, all the impacts that you know about. And I mean, that's 100 years of 160 million acre feet of overdraft. So it's very negative, but at the same time, it's like, wow, that's a pretty big groundwater basin, right? So that's still there. So how do we fill it back up? Like that's the solution. The center of a solution to California water will be what we do in the valley. And what this is what my staff and I like to call our golden trophy chart. Okay, this is, and because most of these I wasn't personally involved in, I can, look backwards and say how bad all these deals were. But if you go before 1978, the blue bar there, that's representative of the Central Valley Project south of Delta. The average allocation every year for a long time, decades, was 100% every year. Then we started to introduce the Water Quality Control Plan from the State Board, D1485. There's things that are really, really important in there about water quality for humans and ag, and there's things that we have to do, granted. But every one of these, the Winter Chinook Salmon Biological Opinion, the CVPIA, the Delta Smelt Biological Opinion, the Bay Delta Accord, and the list goes on. These have been deals. Deals where, it probably sounds familiar right now as we have another discussion about the Water Quality Control Plan that's coming. What these deals represent is the regulators coming to us as water agencies and saying, if you don't come up with a voluntary solution, then this will happen. Mm-hmm. That's the formula. It has worked for them. This proves it. And Friant is a signatory to the, I guess it's Jason Phillips, because the Friant board, no boards have approved the VAs, but Jason Phillips has signed on to the VA on behalf of Friant that says we will do our part on the VA. So I'm not going to say it's something we shouldn't do. Probably, I'm legally not allowed to. But I will tell you one thing that
disclaimer, Jason.
That's my disclaimer. But I would say this: it is going to be the next golden trophy. Okay, that's just a fact. It will result in less water, with the hope, if it's structured differently than all these other ones, that it can turn the corner in the future. It's the hope of, with adaptive management. Adaptive management is new, right, Bill? We never talked about adaptive management until 2023. Right. It was the cornerstone of the Bay Delta Accord. And it's worked pretty well, apparently. So I bring all this up because this has reduced our water supply through the Delta by over 1 million acre-feet per year. And at the same time, we've achieved no goals that all of these regulations wanted to achieve in the Delta. So we still have that problem. So as we move forward, let's just keep that in mind, that these deals are based on feelings at the end of the day, based on a lot of politics, a lot of pressure to individuals like Friant, Metropolitan, and Westlands and other districts. And we need to just make sure that the decision makers in these districts are given the right information. So the result in what's happened, we now have what you see red there. That's the San Joaquin Valley, critically overdrafted basins. We are the target of Sigma. And so when we think about how the water problem will be solved in California, which has to happen with Sigma, none of us can all enjoy the buffer that groundwater overdraft has given us in water management flexibility. That is going to be gone. We can choose that will be gone by getting rid of acreage in California. That will do it. We could get rid of enough farmland and our water problems are solved. In 2014, Ag used 33 million acre-feet of water. That's 53% of the state's water in a dry year. And the environment used 22 million acre-feet, and urbans used 7.5 million acre-feet. So when we talk about how to solve a critical year, it's almost just sort of an interesting but irrelevant discussion about what urbans are going to do. You know, that's just the reality. I mean, we have enough water to supply urbans. The question is how much farming do we want to continue to do in the state? And I think you have other questions on that later, so I'll...
Well, you know, just as an aside, and my friends in the audience have heard me say this ad nauseum, in the 1980s, there's a lot of talk about Star Wars and the Soviet Union, and actually President Reagan used Central Valley food to advance our foreign policy. The Soviet Union had had 2 successive failures of their 5-year plan. Sorry, turn my back on you guys. And they were unable to feed their entire population. And Gorbachev approached Reagan. Reagan approached the Central Valley, and we fed them, and we fed Ethiopia and Africa at that time. So it's an amazing food-generating national security issue for us. So. Okay, but what's the water blueprint, and why should we care about it?
So, great question, and that gets us to pivoting towards solution, right? Because we can only handle so much of this red stuff.
Yes.
But it's important to understand, like, the scale we're talking about here, because, again, when you're feelings-based, which still, when I see the upcoming 2023 water plan from the state, it doesn't look like the water plan's used. It's feelings-based. What we have to, I guess, take the lead and do as water agencies is say, okay, that's fine. We have a certain demand. We have a certain amount of supply. There's a mismatch. What actions are we going to take to balance? And that's what the blueprint got together, and I helped start it 4 to 5 years ago, when after Friant had asked me to help them determine which projects to go invest in. So, well, let's make sure we define our problem. I go, wow, I came back with the problem is a valley problem. It's a state problem, but we're not going to be able to just individually invest in these big projects. It's going to have to be partnership. And by the way, the problem is huge. It's 2 to 4 million acre-feet per year annual average. That's what we have to solve. But when we look at what the blueprint is coming up with to solve, we're looking holistically at, again, nothing new, right? We have the 80% of the precip is north of Delta, 80% of demand is south of Delta. That's nothing to be ashamed about. That's how our state is built. If we want to move away from that, then we're going to go back to about 3 million people. And we won't be growing food. But I don't think that's any public policymaker wants to do that. So the question is going to be, how do we efficiently move that water to where it's needed so that we can have a balanced water supply. By balanced, I mean demand equals supply. We have storage, like I talked about. Just think of the San Joaquin Valley as like a 50 million acre foot reservoir, okay? And we have connections to Southern California. We have some wonderful partnerships with Metropolitan through some of the Friant districts where we can take water in normal years and wetter years and put it in the valley, and then in critical years we can turn to groundwater and provide supply to Southern California. So there's those partnerships we need to look at, but we need to look at them in a much bigger scale. And so that's the blueprint, is really trying to figure out how can we convey to more spaces in the valley to store groundwater that we can get connected to Southern California. Because if we don't have an urban ag partnership, we will not build a solution. We have to take a solution to the state. We can't rely on the state. They're moving more towards feelings-based discussion, so we have to move more in the other way. They do want solutions, but we've got to be ag-urban partners, because ag, we're like 6% of the voting population. We're insignificant for voters. So we have all kinds of beautiful material about how awesome agriculture is and all the different commodities and who we serve, but it doesn't penetrate. And so our partnership with the urbans is going to be how we can meet each other's goals. There are win-wins out there, and it's going to be through this. But guess what? The question we're going to have to ask is, what do we do with the Delta? Because I can give you another 20, 30 minutes on where the supplies come from another day. But just cut to the chase here, the Delta is where it's at. If that's going to, what we do with the Delta to move more water through to recharge will determine how much farmland comes out of production in the next 10 years. It's that simple. And it's not a question of conservation or recycling or can urbans, it's a matter of when we have 10 million acre feet a year of uncaptured water that moves out to the ocean above current regulations. Very hard to capture that because a lot of it comes in very wet years. 100 million acre feet runs out like in 2023. But this is the question that we're going to have to wrestle with. We don't need 10 million acre feet a year. That's not the goal. I think if we could get 1 or 2 million acre feet a year into recharge, we're going to have to retire farmland. But I think that's a policy question. Like, that's the question that should be feelings-based within Sacramento and DC, not how to solve the problem, because they don't know how. But we need to unite behind, look, it's not that simple. It's not as simple as just saying, go off and increase recharge where you can and recycle where you can, and okay, that's all good. But someone's got to show that there's a bigger problem. And the reason it's urgent for us is the longer we just have this feelings-based discussion in Sacramento and DC, farmers are leaving now. This problem is going to solve itself over time. Sigma is going to take out farmland. It's non-strategic land retirement. And it's just going to happen until we get balanced, and it's probably going to happen over the next 10 years, and it's probably going to be between 1 and 2 million acres of farmland. And it can't be farmland that's unproductive, or can't be farmland that's not using water. It's going to be farmland that's productively using water that's going to have to come out, or we can't find a balance. So we talked about the French drain. I just want to point out that we don't have a silver bullet for how to solve the Delta problem, okay? The Delta tunnel that's being discussed is sort of that longer 10, 15, 20-year solution. It's very hard for ag to afford. It's probably going to need to be part of the mix of an urban ag partnership. And it's moving ahead. I know that the State Water Project's looking at it. In 15 years, that 1 million acres are going to be gone. So we're also looking like, what can we start doing right now to get more water? And one of the things we're looking at is, a proven but not on this scale technology that would look at perforated pipe that goes, like this photo shows, it goes on the bottom of either rivers or lakes or estuaries, and you can put gravel over it, over large amounts of acres. We're projecting probably about 200 acres if we wanted to full build out in the Delta. And it could solve a lot of the problems relative to smelt and salmon getting trapped in the pumps, because it would change from a horizontal movement of water over to the pumps to a vertical at a very slow velocity. And so the blueprint right now, what we are looking at is trying to initiate a pilot project on the order of $5 to $10 million pilot project that would start to take a Delta-like environment and see how this can work, to see whether it's something that we would want to invest in as a partnership. And it is very difficult, even if 5-10 million is like, for most of us, that's barely even a agenda item on any of our board meetings, you would think. But it is difficult to think about getting into Delta solutions without having a partnership. So I think one of the holdbacks for the blueprint is we want this to be an ag-urban partnership from the start. So we really haven't started yet with the pilot.
I wonder if there was an agency that owned a couple of islands in the Delta area. If only.
Only.
Is the Delta plan update, is it accommodative to the blueprint?
Yeah, so the Delta plan update, which is AKA unimpaired flow requirement from the state board, or an alternative voluntary agreement, which is only like 6,000 or 7,000 pages. So I should get through it on this weekend. I don't think there's any conflict directly between that plan, particularly like the voluntary agreements, and what we're talking about in the blueprint. It would require updated biological opinions. There's things that would need to be updated through regulations, but what we're looking at is grabbing either normal wet and wet year water, being able to convey it into the valley for recharge. And we need conveyance, and we somehow need to get the right amount of buy-in that this water that's above and beyond regulation today is available. So I think there's a way to make it work. It makes the whole bigger, because we are, like districts, including San Joaquin Valley districts, are giving up water to make the voluntary agreements work.
Right. I guess it's a trade-off, they're either going to take it, or you're going to at least maybe have some control over what you're going to give up. But now let's turn to the lightning round.
Uh-oh.
You're the water czar in California. I wish we could create one of those. And you have the authority to do 1, maybe 2 projects. Darcy, what would you do?
Okay, I'm not doing projects. Let me tell you what I'm going to do. And it's 5 things.
Why am I? I knew it. I was going to say.
So first, every single member of the State Water Resources Control Board is fired. And the people of this state elect those seats. There needs to be accountability, and that's exactly what needs to happen. The Division of Drinking Water moves back to public health because it's a public health issue, and public health matters. That's number 2. 5% of the general fund goes to fund water infrastructure every year, just like education. Because if we keep waiting for bonds, it will never happen. It's too important, and it's repair and replacement. For all of those people here that have a water district and you serve on a water board, don't you put money away for repair and replacement? We have to do the same exact thing. So that's my top 3, and that's only by 10 o'clock in the morning, okay? Number 4, it's really about accountability to ourselves. So how many here are elected or appointed to a water board? It's about courage. Lisa, you chuckle. Jason, you know me for a long time. Secretary, I've actually had the pleasure of having you on my podcast. You know where I stand. You may not agree with me, and I totally appreciate that, but let's have the conversation. I am so tired of going to water board meetings or water conferences and have no idea where people stand. So I'm going to buy some courage, and I'm going to disperse it, because it takes courage to stand up and say, this is what I think is the right thing. I don't have feelings, Jason. I left feelings so long ago, it's not funny. I think I left them in Orange County, as a matter of fact, and then moved on. It's what you think. And just because you have an opinion doesn't make you right. I'm gonna pick on Chairman of Metropolitan right now. Don and I don't always agree. We have known each other for 24 years. We had the same mentor. We're solution-based discussions. He can come from this side, I can come from this side, but it's about what the solution looks like, not from the side you're on. I don't give a damn what side you're on. You have to represent the people. So if I could do anything besides fire everybody the first day, it's really about courage. And then finally, it's about water quality. Just because you can detect it doesn't mean you have to treat it. It doesn't make things affordable. Water should be affordable. Building public trust and credibility, we have to invest in that. It doesn't just automatically happen. And I think when you're courageous, that helps with public trust. So I have to give those that make policy decisions some courage. Like many of you, we're going through a Prop 218 notice. My board president, Andy Morris, is here, and I welcome those opportunities. Let's have the conversation. You're not happy about raising rates? Well, let me tell you, I'm not happy about it either, but let's talk about the why, not the what. And let's find new ways that we can make things affordable, because we're leaving people behind, and that doesn't work either. So those are my top 5 for now. Sorry, I know it's 1 or 2, but 2 isn't going to fix it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Secretary Jones.
Ditto.
I know, we're all going to appoint.
I think she outlined it very well, and I wouldn't disagree with much of any of that. I agree. At Don, we worked on these water issues 20 years ago. Was it 30? I lost track, Don. And unfortunately, we haven't made as much progress as the prior generation has made, as I said earlier. However, I thought some of the points that you brought up for Bryant are all good ideas, and those we have to continue to treat ideas that, as you say, are not feelings-based, but are scientific-based. But when you say that, because it sounds good, you got to make sure you use realistic science, going to your point, because I think what drives so much of this is the fact that when you try to achieve standards that are unrealistic, you waste water. When you try to not identify the problem properly, you waste water. And the fact that when you ignore the fact that we have pushed down to the water districts, and this happened it happened back, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s, when the state used to manage the process. We used to step up. That was one of the major topics when you ran for governor. You had to have a position and a blue paper on water, and you had to be able to articulate how you were going to deal with it. Well, anymore, it's something that comes up at re-election time, and what comes up is the same projects we put in 30 years ago. They talk about it for a little bit, and then it goes away. So that again, it's political, and I don't mean to make it political, but water is political in California. And it's got to be outcome-based. And whether it's the solution, the French drain, which I thought was very creative. As far as the Delta, I ran into somebody. I was doing a deal in Stockton a month or two ago. I walked into the room, and the fellow walks up to me and says, "You were for the peripheral cloud in 1982, or whatever the heck it was." That's the first thing he said to me. And the conversation went downhill from there. and that's 40 years ago. So these old feelings die hard. But I think you asked for one, the state's got to get a handle on this and be responsible again. The leaders have to take more than just a passing interest in the solution. They have to state it, articulate it, and follow through with it. But also, you got to have a willing partner in Washington and Sacramento. We had a deal worked out I thought that would have worked, but it's either one capital or the other doesn't have a partner. And when you go to try and do it that way, it's almost impossible. So you've got to have those partners. And I think as far as the overall solution, the Delta, through Delta, there's some major changes that have taken place. I think there's a change in attitude. The water quality, the amount of turbidity, the amount of salt that's being moved into the Delta and further south is changing people's attitudes a little bit. So that is a positive thing. It's a bad thing that it's happening, but it's forcing some solutions that weren't around 30 years ago when we were all just talking about, well, you can't take any water out of the Delta. So I think that attitude change is a big help. So I think I'd pay attention to the standards. I'd pay attention to making sure that the leadership focuses on these other alternatives. But I don't think that you're going to ever solve this problem if you allow the no-growth environment to drive the process, because then water becomes a tool to stop growth. And sharing scarcity has never been what California's been about. We're going to grow. You have to take care of the people. You got to make it reasonable, and you got to be able to pay for things like water. But at the end of the day, I'm a farmer, and so I lean with the Friant folks. When the water gets so expensive and you start retiring ground, there's no place else in the world that has our land here. The temperatures, the climate. If we don't grow it here, it's not going to get grown. And while it's only a small percentage of the people, I think, and we are the first ones to get water taken away in dry periods, and that's fine. But by the same token, when you lose that ag land, you'll never get it back. And we need to be sensitive to that fact. So I would be very focused on making sure that is the last choice for us in trying to resolve this issue.
Okay, so that was a vote for the blueprint. I'm gonna make you pick one, water czar. One project, one.
Well, I honestly think that the one that's struggled through so long, I just happen to be personally identified with Sykes.
Yeah.
And I tell you, because my dad started with it in the 60s. Wow. I put it back on with Senator Costa in the 90s. We're still talking about it here. And maybe we've beaten that horse so hard now, maybe it's finally going to get to the point where people are exhausted and they have to fund it and actually do it. Just like we said a minute ago, you can't talk about these projects because people lose confidence, and when you lose confidence in the government's ability to deliver. So I picked that project and I deliver on something, like Southern California did with the Diamond Valley project. They actually did something. And I remember going out and did when that happened. And I remember hearing about it from the Southern California delegation. They were very proud of that, and they should be. But that should have been a state project. We should have stepped up as a state and got involved more in that instead of balkanizing California and forcing all the water districts to scurry around trying to solve their own problem. That's not how California was established. That's not how we've led. And so you asked for one project, I would do that and prove I could do it.
All right. I would vote for you for water czar if Darcy wasn't available.
I think it's better. Darcy's better.
Thank you.
So I think we've established right now, Darcy, you're up there. But, Jason's sitting here and with no feelings. Yeah. You have a heart for Orange County. I think you still do. But Jason has none.
Okay.
But Jason, tell us, why should we have you as our water czar?
As a fellow Padres fan,
Oh.
I have a heart.
Done.
Done.
You're it. Done. We're done.
Okay, so this wouldn't be my answer because you'll all laugh, but I'm just saying that because you didn't tell me the constraints. Water czar, I don't know what the budget or politics. I mean, Auburn Dam.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one.
Look, and that's the project that remains in the state that could provide yield like we wouldn't even understand, power like we wouldn't understand flood control. But that's
Okay, for
that's
the
not
people
for.
that don't know the dam that would not die, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Auburn Dam was part of the Central Valley project that was actually, it's up on the American River near Roseville, Rockland area. And construction was started. In fact, I used to live in Roseville, and my wife and I would walk American River Trail, and you would see the concrete abutments where the dam site had started. and politics got in the way, and earthquake fears got in the way, and construction stopped for a short time period and then never started back up. And look, I'm not advocating, don't get me wrong, I said it's not my answer because I don't want the headline to be, oh, Friant thinks we should build Auburn Dam. Because, come on. I may not try and lead with feelings. I have feelings.
Wait, do you have some?
But I don't think it's my job to lead with feelings, but I also think that relationships and partnerships and political realities have to play a huge part in water management. If I were assigned water czar, given the political realities, what I would long to do, and it's actually what I think we need to do, regardless of if there's a water czar that does it, is the blueprint needs to expand the partnership with Southern California, and we've already started a lot of those discussions. Of course, it needs to include Northern California and Delta, and we know who the people are. We need to get together, not think small, not think parochial. Like if I come to that table with, here's what Friant needs, like kick me out. And we need to not have our objective be projects. That's our problem. We want to push projects, and we want to strategize, what's our strategic plan to build this project? Yep. Well, we've been checkmated on that approach. The enviros will kill us every time. And no matter who of us tries to push it. But I would like to get that coalition together for a state blueprint that we don't need to yet involve the state and federal governments because it gets too complicated. As water purveyors and as those that the public relies on to deliver the water throughout the state, we should come up with a blueprint with alternatives and really force a public policy debate about what alternative we're going to move forward with. It serves our selfish purpose because I just want the state to have to wrestle with how many acres of farmland do we want to retire to balance things. But we don't really have an alternative yet to fully push that science shows would actually create enough yield to balance the problem. I think it's out there. I think there's enough storage in the valley and enough resources and water in the wet years and with Southern California to partner. I think we can do it. But to have like Aqua and the Blueprint and Metropolitan and all member agencies to get involved, and we have Delta interests. We're starting to do day-long relationship building with Delta farming interests. I mean, they're important. And then I think we need to take that blueprint and decide very surgically, where must we involve the state and federal governments? And then go to them with that. And I know it's enticing for all of the directors to think, oh, my general manager can go get me a $10 million grant from blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. Now go do that. But that's what's complicating us getting what's done because the state and federal governments, the election cycles are too fast for them to be able to solve our problem. Like we've got to come up with the blueprint, and then we have to be united in what we actually need from the government.
And I do not disagree with you, but there's a reality that they hold a lot of our purse strings at the state, right? And they've got the state water plan. And we're talking about a blueprint. How do we balance the fact that we have to go to them for grant funding, and then we're going to stand over here and say, but you know what, we're going to ignore your water plan because we've got our blueprint over here, and we're going to move out and do that.
Well, look at the 2023 draft water plan. It's not a plan. Like, they don't have a plan anymore. It's the sky is falling, there's climate change, there's, and those are all not untruths, but the reality is they don't have a plan. The plan right now is to fail. Like if you look at 2014 through 2022, do you want that to happen again? If the answer is no, well, what have we done different? All I hear is it's going to get worse. Okay? Well, if it's going to get worse, well, why don't we at least have a plan for what we already know happened, because it's going to happen again. And that's where I think, I understand grant money, but if these projects are feasible, if we can come up with a feasible approach, why rely on state grant money? I mean, maybe there's financing ideas. Maybe we have to go to the voters for revenue bonds or something, but let's decide kind of what the blueprint looks like, not just for the San Joaquin Valley, but for the state.
Darcy, you're like wanting to say something.
So the new water plan has really nice graphics. Where when you go back to the 1957 plan, it had specific projects that talked about yield and power plant production and miles of conveyance and acre feet delivered. It was very specific. If you don't read the plan, that's fine, but look at the engineers who signed it. It is a list of the who's who of water world, right? The best of the best spent 10 years identifying projects. That was our blueprint. We left it, right? I don't say, everything in that is what we should be doing. And you know what? I'm going to give our profession a little credit. This thought that we're not environmentally aware or sensitive is BS. Look at Doheny, the Doheny Ocean Desal Project. That came out of MODOC. That was an idea by Richard Bell, right? Let's take some credit for that, right? We're not going to burn and pillage our communities to build projects. We have evolved as well, right? So to think that we're just going to ruin our landscape in the state is really prejudicial. We have to live with our communities too when we want to. I live in a drinking water reservoir, one of 3 in California, with full body contact, which is pretty cool. Do you think I want it to be, destroyed for infrastructure? No, I want infrastructure to blend in so that everybody can still enjoy the trails and boating and everything else. And I think all of you do too. So I think this idea that, well, again, Jason, I don't have feelings, that we're going to do bad things because we're water people is really a reflection of the reputation we have painted for ourselves. We could waive CEQA for SoFi Stadium. Really? And now the president just waived everything for a wall. But we can't get any relief for water reliability. What does that tell the public? And what is better yet is the public telling us. So I don't think we need a new plan. I think we need to dust off the plan we had with some of the greatest engineering minds in the world ever, use some new innovation and technology and see how we can get it done. Because I started doing outreach at MODOC. I didn't want to say what part of this century it was. And as far as I know, we're still not taking water on Doheny Beach. So I don't have another generation to wait. Neither do you. And time is not our friend. Not just for you, Jason, but for us either, right? Our communities matter. My little water district isn't so little anymore. We're 35% built out. We recycle 100% of every drop we have. Where the hell am I going to get more water for the people that are coming? And you know where they're coming from? LA, Orange County. So it's not even like they're coming from out of state. They don't like it where they are, and they're moving to affordable housing in a natural environment. So this idea of, well, we'll wait, and we'll do this, and I don't have time to wait. I was very encouraged at Metropolitan when I was listening in the other day, which I can honestly say is not all the time. When I heard the general manager say that we as a region have to do this for everybody. If we don't do it, no individual region can afford it. I was encouraged because my water agency and my 3 neighbors, Western, Eastern, and Rancho, are exploring big projects and trying to figure out how we're going to pay for it because we need the water. And Jason, I don't want to take your water. I want to help you get water. If I could find a way for our district to store water and fry it, I'll do it because it's the right thing to do. I think many people in this room would do the same thing. If you're telling me we have excess water right now, I'd much rather put it in his basin than have it go underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. I don't know anybody in the room, anybody at all? Maybe you can make a deal, you know? Inexpensive storage, maybe now?
Well, I don't know about that.
So I think we planned to death.
Well, I heard, no, it's not project-based, but yet, we need projects, right? So, but I'm intrigued because kind of what I'm hearing you say is we need to leverage the... Wow.
That's just a warning.
Yeah, that's right. We need to leverage kind of the population and the property tax revenue, or the basis of the 80% of Southern California that is represented there, statewide, and partner with you guys to get some projects, but not projects done.
Well, don't get me wrong, it's projects, but right now it's just a patchwork of individual, like sometimes there's regional coalitions saying, hey, we want this project, but the only way we'll get moving is if we have a blueprint that shows where the projects fit together and solve the problem, and then we push that. Now, I'm not saying ultimately it's going to be projects, but we can't start with projects. We have to show that a system of projects will actually solve the problem, and here's how we all fit into it.
I'm rubbing my hands together because I want to form this giant joint powers authority over the entire state, and do this, because to me, the problem is funding. At the end of the day, we can all talk about stuff, but...
I think it's will. I don't think it's funding. I think it's courage, because where there's a will, there's a way, and we're smart people. We can figure the funding out.
Okay.
It's not about the money, it's about the value. And when you show people the value, then it becomes a way we'll figure the money out. But we have to have the courage to make it happen.
Okay, but you got to get that courage in one room. You got to, right? You got to do something to
lock the doors. Oh, sorry.
Or we're just expelling air again at another seminar, and nothing's going to get done. So I hope and I pray, literally. That, and